Captain Jake Morrison sat in his worn command chair aboard the cargo ship New Haven and watched the stars drift past the main window. He had been hauling supplies between human colonies for 15 years and thought he had seen everything the galaxy could throw at him. The ship carried medical equipment and food supplies bound for Haven's Rest, a small mining colony on the edge of human space. It was supposed to be a routine run that would take 3 weeks each way. Dr. Lisa Hamilton walked onto the bridge, carrying 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Jake. She served as the ship's medical officer and had been making this run with him for the past 2 years. Lisa was one of the few people who could tolerate Jake's habit of playing old Earth music during the long jumps between star systems. She sat down in the chair next to him and pulled up the navigation charts on her tablet. The distress signal came through the communications array at exactly 1400 hours ship time. The message was weak and filled with static, but the automated systems managed to clean it up enough to understand the words. Jake turned down the music and listened as the desperate voice came through the speakers. The caller identified himself as Dr. Kevin Walsh from Research Station Alpha 7, a small scientific outpost that studied alien artifacts near the border between human and unexplored space. Dr. Walsh's voice cracked with fear as he described how unknown alien ships had attacked the station without warning. He said the aliens had already destroyed the station's defensive systems and were demanding that the research team surrender all their data about human technology. Walsh begged for immediate assistance and said they could only hold out for a few more hours before the aliens broke through their emergency barriers. Jake looked at Lisa and saw the concern in her eyes. Research Station Alpha 7 was only 6 hours away if they pushed the engines to maximum speed. The New Haven was not a warship, but it carried emergency medical supplies that might help wounded researchers. Jake knew that every human colony, an outpost, was supposed to help each other in times of crisis, even if it meant risking their own safety. Lisa pulled up the station's location on the star charts and confirmed that it was real. The research facility had been established 3 years ago to study strange alien ruins found on a dead planet in that system. The team consisted of 12 scientists and archaeologists who were trying to understand how an ancient alien civilization had built structures that seemed to defy known physics. Their work was considered important enough that Earth Command had assigned a small defense platform to protect them. Jake made the decision to respond to the distress call even though he knew it could be dangerous. He ordered the ship's computer to plot a course for Research Station Alpha 7 and push the engines to their maximum safe speed. The New Haven was an old ship, but her engines were reliable and could sustain high speed for several hours without overheating. Jake sent a reply message to Dr. Walsh telling him that help was on the way and to hold on until they arrived. The 6-hour journey felt like an eternity as Jake and Lisa monitored the communications array for any updates from the research station. They tried calling Dr. Walsh several times but received no response. Jake hoped that the aliens had not yet broken through the station's defenses and that the research team was simply maintaining communication silence to avoid detection. He had Lisa prepare the medical bay in case there were wounded people who needed immediate treatment. When the New Haven dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Alpha 7 system, Jake immediately scanned for the research station. The facility appeared on his sensors exactly where it should be, orbiting the dead planet where the alien ruins were located. Everything looked normal from a distance, but Jake noticed that the defensive platform was not responding to his identification signals. He tried to contact the station again but heard only empty static. Jake ordered Lisa to prepare for emergency docking procedures while he maneuvered the New Haven closer to the research station. As they approached, he could see that the facility's outer hull showed signs of damage from energy weapons. Several sections had been breached, and there was no sign of life support activity. Jake felt a cold fear growing in his stomach as he realized they might be too late to help anyone. The alien ships appeared without warning when the New Haven was only a few kilometers from the research station. Jake watched in horror as massive vessels materialized out of nothing, their hulls covered in strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at directly. The ships were at least 10 times larger than his cargo vessel and bristled with weapon systems that he had never seen before. Lisa gasped and grabbed his arm as more ships continued to appear around them. Jake immediately tried to turn the New Haven around and escape, but the alien ships were much faster than his old cargo hauler. Energy beams lanced out from the closest alien vessel and struck his ship's engines, disabling them completely. Emergency alarms began screaming throughout the ship as power systems failed one by one. Jake knew they were trapped and that these aliens had been waiting for someone to respond to the fake distress call. In the final moments before the alien weapons destroyed the New Haven completely, Jake managed to activate the emergency transmitter that would send a message back to Earth Command. The transmission contained everything his sensors had recorded about the alien ships and their location. Jake hoped that someone would receive his warning and understand that humanity was now at war with a species that used deception and murder as their primary tactics. The last thing he saw was Lisa's face as the bridge exploded around them. Admiral Kate Johnson stood in the command center of Earth Defense Headquarters and watched the emergency message from Captain Jake Morrison play for the third time. The transmission was badly damaged, but the computer systems had managed to reconstruct enough of the data to understand what had happened at Research Station Alpha 7. The images of the alien ships sent chills down her spine, not because of their size or obvious power, but because of what their presence meant for humanity. The message had reached Earth Command exactly 18 hours after the New Haven was destroyed. Kate had been awakened in the middle of the night by her aide, Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster, who told her that they had received a Priority 1 distress signal from the frontier. She had rushed to headquarters expecting to deal with another pirate attack or equipment failure, but found instead the first evidence that humanity was not alone in the galaxy, and that their new neighbors were hostile. President Charles Davis arrived at the command center within 2 hours of the initial alert. He was a former military officer who understood the implications of what they were seeing on the screens around them. Kate briefed him on everything they knew about the attack, while her staff worked to verify the authenticity of Morrison's final transmission. The data showed that the alien ships used energy weapons far more advanced than anything in the human arsenal, and that they had used deception to lure the New Haven into a trap. Kate had spent her entire career preparing for the possibility of contact with alien civilizations, but every scenario the military planners had considered assumed that first contact would involve some form of communication or negotiation. The idea that aliens would simply attack human facilities without warning had been considered unlikely by most experts. The evidence from Alpha 7 suggested that these particular aliens viewed humans as nothing more than targets to be eliminated or enslaved. Dr. Sam Carter arrived from the Weapons Research Division to analyze the technical data from Morrison's sensors. Sam was one of the brightest minds in human space and had designed many of the defensive systems currently protecting Earth and the major colonies. He studied the alien ship configurations for several hours before delivering his assessment to Kate and the President. The alien vessels used technology that was at least 50 years ahead of current human capabilities. But they were not invincible. Sam explained that the alien ships appeared to rely heavily on energy shields and directed energy weapons, which suggested they had never fought an enemy that used kinetic projectiles and nuclear warheads. Human military doctrine was based on the assumption that any war would be fought against other humans who used similar technology and tactics. The aliens had made the mistake of assuming that humans would fight like every other species they had encountered before. Kate began mobilizing the Earth Defense Fleet within hours of receiving confirmation that the attack was real. She sent coded messages to every human military commander in the galaxy, ordering them to prepare for immediate deployment to an unknown enemy. The orders were simple and direct. Every available warship was to rendezvous at the Sol System's edge within 72 hours for a mission that would determine humanity's survival as a free species. Captain Maria Santos received her deployment orders while commanding the heavy cruiser Vengeance on patrol near the Tau Ceti colonies. She had been expecting a routine inspection of merchant vessels when the priority message arrived from Earth Command. Maria read the orders twice to make sure she understood them correctly, then ordered her crew to prepare for immediate departure. The Vengeance was one of the newest ships in the fleet and carried enough firepower to destroy an entire pirate armada. The response from human military units across the galaxy was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, Kate had confirmation that more than 300 warships were heading toward the rendezvous point. The fleet included everything from massive dreadnoughts to small patrol corvettes, but every ship carried the same cargo, weapons designed to kill other humans in the most efficient way possible. Kate realized that humanity's long history of warfare against itself had created the perfect military force for fighting aliens. General Patricia Wells commanded the Marine Corps, units that would be needed for any ground operations against alien facilities. Her troops were trained for combat in hostile environments and carried weapons that could penetrate any known armor or defensive system. Patricia had fought in the colonial wars and knew how to adapt human tactics to unusual battlefield conditions. She began planning assault operations against alien bases even though she had no idea what kind of defenses they might encounter. The President addressed the United Earth Federation 36 hours after the initial attack, telling the assembled representatives about the destruction of the New Haven and the murder of innocent civilians at Research Station Alpha 7. He explained that humanity now faced an enemy that used deception and surprise attacks against defenseless researchers and cargo haulers. The vote to authorize military action was unanimous, with every colony and settlement agreeing that the aliens had to be stopped before they could attack more human targets. Kate worked around the clock to coordinate the largest military operation in human history. The logistics of moving hundreds of warships to a single location were staggering, but her staff managed to create a plan that would have the entire fleet ready for deployment within 1 week. She studied every piece of information about the alien ships and tried to develop tactics that would give humanity an advantage in the coming battles. The assembled fleet was a sight that would have terrified any enemy who understood what human warships were designed to do. Each vessel carried enough nuclear weapons to sterilize a planet and kinetic projectiles that could punch through any known armor. The crews were veterans of countless conflicts between human factions and had been trained to fight without mercy when protecting innocent lives. Kate looked at the tactical displays showing her massive fleet and knew that the aliens had made a fatal mistake when they chose to attack humanity through deception and murder. Kate's final briefing to the fleet commanders was broadcast to every ship in the Armada. She told them about Captain Morrison's sacrifice and the innocent researchers who had died at Alpha 7. She explained that their mission was not just to defeat the alien threat, but to send a message to any other hostile species that might be watching. Humanity would not tolerate attacks on civilians and would respond to aggression with overwhelming force. The nightmare that had begun with a fake distress call was about to become the aliens' worst mistake. Commander Vex Korath stood on the bridge of the Zephyrian dreadnought, Crimson Talon, and reviewed the reports from his successful trap at the Human Research Station. The operation had proceeded exactly as planned with the primitive human cargo ship arriving at the perfect time to be destroyed by his waiting battle group. The humans had proven to be as naive and predictable as every other species the Zephyrian Empire had conquered over the past 3 centuries. The Zephyrian Empire controlled more than 40 star systems and had enslaved dozens of different alien species through superior technology and ruthless tactics. Their standard procedure was to study a new species for several months, identify their weaknesses, and then strike without warning at their most vulnerable points. The humans appeared to be no different from the others, with small settlements spread across only a few dozen worlds and primitive weapons that relied on chemical explosives rather than directed energy. Supreme Marshal Vex Varen had personally ordered the operation against the Human Research Station after Zephyrian scouts reported finding the facility near the border of their territory. The humans were studying ancient ruins that contained technology the Zephyrians wanted for themselves, and the research team had to be eliminated before they could discover anything useful. The fake distress call had been designed to draw human rescue ships into an ambush where they could be captured and studied. Korath had expected the humans to send a military vessel to investigate the distress signal, but instead they had dispatched an unarmed cargo ship with only 2 crew members aboard. The easy victory had disappointed him because he had hoped to capture human weapons and military personnel for analysis. The destruction of the New Haven had provided some useful sensor data about human technology, but not enough to plan a full invasion of their space. The Zephyrian intelligence analysis suggested that humans were a typical, peaceful species that would surrender quickly when faced with superior firepower. Their settlements appeared to have minimal defensive systems, and their small fleet consisted mainly of cargo haulers and exploration vessels. Korath estimated that the entire human civilization could be conquered within 6 months using a single battle group of Zephyrian warships. What Korath did not know was that human military vessels had been shadowing his fleet for the past week, using stealth technology that the Zephyrians had never encountered before. Lieutenant Commander Ryan Foster piloted one of the new Ghost-class fighters that had been designed specifically for reconnaissance missions behind enemy lines. His ship was completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors and had been recording everything. About their fleet movements and tactical procedures, Foster had volunteered for the dangerous mission of following the Zephyrian fleet back to their forward bases and gathering intelligence for Admiral Johnson's planned counterattack. His fighter carried no weapons, but it was equipped with the most advanced sensor array ever built by human engineers. Foster had been tracking the alien fleet for 6 days and had identified their main staging area at a captured mining facility. In the Kepler system, the Zephyrian base at Kepler Station had been built around a massive asteroid that contained rare minerals needed for their weapons production. The facility housed more than 10,000 Zephyrian military personnel and served as the command center for their expansion into human space. Korath used the base as his headquarters and believed it was completely secure from any possible human attack. Foster transmitted his intelligence reports back to the human fleet using burst communications that were impossible for the Zephyrians to detect or intercept. His data included detailed information about the base's defensive systems, the number and type of ships stationed there, and the location of critical facilities like the command center and weapons storage areas. Foster also discovered that the Zephyrians were holding human prisoners from the research station in detention cells deep inside the asteroid. Admiral Johnson received Foster's reports and immediately began planning the first major human offensive against an alien target. Her fleet had grown to more than 400 warships as additional vessels arrived from the outer colonies and frontier defense forces. The human armada included heavy dreadnoughts, fast attack cruisers, and experimental weapons platforms that had never been tested in actual combat. Against alien technology, the human battle plan was designed around the element of surprise and overwhelming firepower concentrated at the enemy's weakest points. Johnson had studied the Zephyrian base layouts provided by Foster and identified several critical vulnerabilities that could be exploited by human weapon systems. The aliens had built their defenses to counter energy weapons and conventional missiles, but they had no protection against kinetic projectiles traveling at near light speed. Captain Maria Santos commanded one of the assault groups that would spearhead the attack on Kepler Station. Her heavy cruiser Vengeance carried experimental railguns that could accelerate projectiles to incredible velocities using magnetic fields. The weapons had been designed to penetrate the heaviest armor used by human military forces, but they had never been tested against alien defensive systems. Santos was eager to discover how effective human kinetic weapons would be against Zephyrian technology. Dr. Alex Turner worked around the clock to modify human weapons for use against alien targets based on the sensor data collected by Foster's reconnaissance mission. Alex had designed many of the adaptive systems used by human military forces and understood how to reconfigure weapons to exploit specific weaknesses in enemy defenses. His modifications included special warheads that could penetrate energy shields and guidance systems that could track fast-moving alien vessels. The human fleet moved into position around the Kepler system using stealth technology that made them invisible to Zephyrian sensors until they were ready to attack. Johnson coordinated the assault from her flagship, while hundreds of smaller vessels took up positions around the asteroid base. The Zephyrians had no idea that their supposedly secure facility was about to become the target of the largest military. Operation in Human History. Foster led the initial strike by guiding nuclear missiles through the base's defensive perimeter using his knowledge of their blind spots and patrol patterns. The first explosions caught the Zephyrians completely by surprise and destroyed their early warning systems before they could alert other facilities. Foster watched as human warships emerged from stealth and began their devastating attack on the alien base that had seemed so invincible just moments before. The battle for Kepler Station lasted only 3 hours, but it changed everything about how the galaxy viewed humanity. The Zephyrian base was completely destroyed, along with most of the alien fleet stationed there. More importantly, the human rescue teams found and freed the prisoners from Research Station Alpha 7, proving that the attack had been more than just military conquest. The humans had come not just to fight, but to save innocent lives and punish those who had committed atrocities against defenseless civilians. News of the devastating defeat at Kepler Station reached Supreme Marshal Vex Varen while he was reviewing intelligence reports about other potential targets in human space. The initial reports seemed impossible to believe because no enemy force had ever penetrated Zephyrian defenses so completely or destroyed an entire base in such a short time. Varen demanded confirmation from multiple sources before accepting that Commander Korath and his entire fleet had been wiped out by the supposedly primitive human military forces. The tactical analysis of the battle revealed that the humans had used weapons and tactics that were completely unknown to Zephyrian military science. Instead of the energy-based weapons that every other civilized species employed, the humans had attacked with solid projectiles traveling at incredible speeds, and nuclear explosives that could vaporize entire sections of the asteroid base. The Zephyrian shields and armor that had protected them from conventional weapons were useless against kinetic impacts that struck with the force of meteors. What disturbed Varen most was not the human weapons technology, but their apparent immunity to the psychological warfare tactics that had proven effective against every other species the Empire had conquered. The Zephyrians typically used fear and intimidation to break enemy morale before the actual fighting began, but the humans seemed to become more aggressive and determined when they discovered evidence of Zephyrian cruelty toward prisoners and civilian populations. Captain Nina Brooks led the human ground forces that secured the ruins of Kepler Station after the orbital bombardment had eliminated the main Zephyrian defensive positions. Her Marines wore powered armor that allowed them to operate in the vacuum of space while carrying weapons that could penetrate any known material. Brooks had fought in several colonial conflicts and understood how to clear fortified positions without causing unnecessary casualties. Among friendly forces or prisoners, the human rescue teams found more than just the survivors from Research Station Alpha 7 in the Zephyrian detention facilities. The aliens had been collecting prisoners from at least 6 different species over the past several years and using them for medical experiments and forced labor. Brooks ordered her medics to treat all the injured prisoners regardless of their species, following standard human military doctrine that required the protection of non-combatants during any military operation. Dr. Lisa Hamilton had somehow survived the destruction of the New Haven and had been held prisoner by the Zephyrians for more than 2 weeks before the human fleet arrived. She provided crucial intelligence about Zephyrian interrogation methods and revealed that the aliens had been trying to learn about human military capabilities and the location of major population centers. The Zephyrians had been planning a full-scale invasion of human space, using the information they extracted from their prisoners. Admiral Johnson used the intelligence gathered from the liberated prisoners to plan the next phase of human military operations against Zephyrian targets. The aliens controlled more than a dozen star systems within striking distance of human colonies, and each one contained military facilities that posed a direct threat to civilian populations. Johnson decided to eliminate These threats threw a series of coordinated strikes that would prevent the Zephyrians from regrouping and launching their planned invasion. General Patricia Wells organized the liberation of Zerion Prime, a mining world where the Zephyrians had enslaved the native population and forced them to extract rare minerals used in advanced weapons production. The planet's surface was covered with massive industrial complexes that were protected by orbital defense, platforms, and ground-based weapon systems. Wells knew that a direct assault would result in heavy casualties among both human forces and the enslaved workers. The human attack on Zerion Prime demonstrated the tactical flexibility that made their military forces so effective against alien opponents. Instead of attempting to destroy the heavily defended industrial facilities, Wells used precision strikes to eliminate only the Zephyrian command centers and weapon installations while leaving the infrastructure intact. Her ground forces then moved in to secure the facilities and free the enslaved workers who could continue operating the mines under human protection. Captain Kevin Roberts commanded the experimental siege ship Avalanche during the assault on the Zephyrian fortress world of Vega Station. The massive vessel carried a single weapon system that had been designed to crack open heavily defended asteroids and space stations without using nuclear explosives. The magnetic accelerator could launch projectiles the size of small buildings at velocities approaching the speed of light, creating kinetic impacts that could penetrate any known defensive system. Roberts used the Avalanche's main gun to demonstrate human military capabilities to the Zephyrian defenders before demanding their surrender. The test shot vaporized a small moon in the outer system, creating a spectacular explosion that could be seen from the planet's surface. The psychological impact of the demonstration was immediate and decisive, with most of the Zephyrian garrison surrendering without firing a single shot in defense of their supposedly impregnable fortress. Dr. Sam Carter continued developing new weapon systems specifically designed to counter Zephyrian technology as the human fleet captured more alien equipment and technical data. His adaptive missile systems could analyze enemy defenses during flight and reconfigure themselves to exploit any weaknesses they detected. The Zephyrians began calling these weapons demon seeds because they seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to penetrate any defensive system. The speed and efficiency of the human military campaign began to cause panic among Zephyrian commanders throughout their empire. Reports were arriving daily of human fleets appearing without warning in previously secure star systems and destroying military installations with weapons that seemed to ignore CONVNTIONAL defenses. The humans were not just winning battles, they were systematically dismantling the military infrastructure that had taken the Zephyrians centuries to construct. What terrified the Zephyrian leadership most was the realization that humans seemed to grow stronger and more determined with each battle rather than becoming exhausted by continuous warfare. Other species typically sought peace negotiations after suffering significant losses, but the humans showed no interest in diplomatic solutions. They appeared to be fighting a war of complete annihilation against anyone who threatened civilian populations or committed atrocities against prisoners. Supreme Marshal Varen finally understood that his empire faced an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. When he received reports about human treatment of captured Zephyrian personnel, instead of executing prisoners or using them for slave labor, the humans were establishing war crimes tribunals and holding formal trials to determine individual guilt or innocence. The process was slow and careful, but it was resulting in death sentences for Zephyrian officers who had participated in attacks on civilian targets. The systematic destruction of Zephyrian military forces continued for several more weeks as human fleets appeared in system after system throughout the Empire. Each attack followed the same pattern, with human forces offering surrender terms that guaranteed fair treatment for those who had not committed war crimes while promising swift execution for those who had murdered civilians. The psychological impact of this approach was devastating to Zephyrian morale and caused widespread desertions among their remaining military units. Varen realized that his empire was facing complete collapse when human forces began liberating the various species that the Zephyrians had conquered and enslaved over the past 3 centuries. The newly freed populations immediately began providing intelligence about Zephyrian military installations and offering to assist human forces in their campaign against their former oppressors. The nightmare that had begun with a simple trap at a human research station had grown into a galactic uprising against Zephyrian tyranny. The final confrontation between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire took place in the Zephyr system, where Supreme Marshal Vex Varen had assembled the last remnants of his once mighty fleet around the imperial capital world. The massive planet housed more than 50 billion Zephyrians and served as the political and military center of an empire that had dominated this region of the galaxy for over 3 centuries. Varen had withdrawn his surviving forces to this system, hoping to negotiate a peace treaty that would allow his civilization to survive. Admiral Kate Johnson arrived at the edge of the Zephyr system with the largest human fleet ever assembled. For a single military operation, more than 800 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel simultaneously. Their combined firepower sufficient to sterilize every planet in the system within a matter of hours. The human armada included vessels from every colony and settlement in human space, all united in their determination to end the Zephyrian threat once and for all. The Zephyrian defensive fleet that waited for them was still formidable, despite the losses suffered during the previous months of warfare. Varen commanded more than 200 capital ships and thousands of smaller vessels, all protected by the most advanced defensive systems that Zephyrian technology could produce. The orbital fortresses surrounding the capital world mounted weapons that could destroy entire moons, and the planet's surface was covered with military installations that had never been successfully attacked by any enemy force. Johnson had no intention of engaging in a prolonged siege that would cost thousands of human lives and potentially harm the civilian population of the Zephyrian capital. Instead, she decided to demonstrate human military capabilities in a way that would convince the enemy leadership to surrender without requiring a devastating battle. The Admiral ordered Captain Kyle Roberts to prepare the Avalanche for a demonstration shot that would show the Zephyrians exactly what they were facing. Roberts positioned his massive siege ship at the edge of the asteroid belt that surrounded the Zephyr system and began charging the main weapon for maximum power. The magnetic accelerator drew energy from the ship's 3 fusion reactors and built up a charge that could launch a projectile at nearly the speed of light. Roberts selected a large asteroid as his target and fired the weapon while broadcasting the test on all frequencies so that every Zephyrian in the system could witness the demonstration. The asteroid was completely vaporized by the kinetic impact, creating an explosion that briefly outshone the system's star and sent shockwaves through space that could be detected by every sensor array in the region. The demonstration proved that human weapons could destroy any target regardless of its size or defensive systems, and that the Zephyrian capital world would be defenseless against a sustained bombardment by the human fleet. Johnson transmitted a simple ultimatum to the Zephyrian leadership following the demonstration. The message offered immediate surrender with guaranteed protection for all civilians and military personnel who had not participated in war crimes against other species. Those who had committed atrocities would face trial by international tribunal. But the vast majority of Zephyrians would be allowed to continue their lives under a new government that respected the rights of other civilizations. The alternative to surrender was clearly stated in the ultimatum. Johnson explained that humanity had the capability to reduce the entire Zephyrian capital world to molten slag within minutes, and that such action would be taken if the Empire continued to resist. The Admiral gave Varen exactly 24 hours to respond with either unconditional surrender or a declaration that his people preferred extinction to submission. Supreme Marshal Varen spent the longest day of his life trying to find some alternative to the choices presented by the human admiral. He consulted with his remaining military commanders and political advisors, but none of them could suggest a strategy that might allow the Empire to survive against the overwhelming force assembled outside their home system. The demonstration of human weapons technology had convinced even the most militant Zephyrians that continued resistance would result in the complete annihilation of their civilization. Dr. Alex Turner worked with the human intelligence services to prepare detailed lists of Zephyrian war criminals who would need to be arrested and tried for their crimes against other species. The evidence collected from liberated prisoners and captured military records provided overwhelming proof of systematic atrocities committed by Zephyrian forces throughout their empire. Turner estimated that fewer than 10% of Zephyrian military personnel had actually participated in war crimes, meaning that the vast majority could be allowed to return to civilian life. General Patricia Wells prepared her ground forces for the occupation of the Zephyrian capital world while hoping that such action would not be necessary. Her Marines had been training for urban combat operations in case they needed to secure major population centers, but Wells knew that fighting in cities with billions of civilians would be a humanitarian disaster regardless of who won the battles. She prayed that Varen would choose surrender over the destruction of his entire species. Captain Maria Santos commanded one of the battle groups positioned around the Zephyrian orbital fortresses and watched as the enemy defensive systems remained powered down throughout the day. The lack of aggressive action by the Zephyrian fleet suggested that their leadership was seriously considering the human ultimatum rather than preparing for a final desperate battle. Santos had seen enough death and destruction during the campaign and hoped that the war could end without more bloodshed. The surrender came with only 2 hours remaining before Johnson's deadline expired. Varen transmitted a formal statement, accepting the human terms and ordering all Zephyrian military forces to stand down and prepare for occupation by human forces. The Supreme Marshal also provided detailed information about the location of all remaining Zephyrian military installations and promised full cooperation with the war crimes tribunals that would be established to bring justice to those who had committed atrocities. Johnson accepted the Zephyrian surrender and immediately began implementing the occupation procedures that had been planned for this moment. Human forces moved quickly to secure all military installations and government facilities, while establishing temporary administrations that would maintain order during the transition period. The admiral was careful to treat surrendering Zephyrian personnel with dignity and respect, following the same principles that had guided human military operations throughout the campaign. The trials of Zephyrian war criminals began within weeks of the surrender and were conducted according to strict legal procedures that ensured fair treatment for all defendants. The evidence against those who had participated in attacks on civilian populations was overwhelming, but the human tribunals took great care to distinguish between those who had followed illegal orders and those who had initiated or encouraged such actions. The proceedings were broadcast throughout the galaxy to demonstrate that justice would be applied equally to all species. The liberation of the various species that had been conquered and enslaved by the Zephyrian Empire created a wave of gratitude toward humanity that transformed the political landscape of the entire galactic region. Dozens of civilizations that had suffered under Zephyrian rule for centuries were suddenly free to rebuild their societies and reclaim their independence. Many of these species formally requested alliance treaties with humanity, recognizing that human military power was the only thing preventing the rise of another oppressive empire. Captain Jake Morrison and Dr. Lisa Hamilton were both awarded the highest military honors that humanity could bestow for their sacrifice and courage during the initial attack that had started the war. Morrison was honored posthumously for his decision to respond to the distress call despite the obvious danger, while Hamilton received recognition for the intelligence she provided after her rescue from Zephyrian captivity. Their names became symbols of the human commitment to protecting innocent lives regardless of the personal cost. The galaxy learned several important lessons from the brief but decisive war between humanity and the Zephyrian Empire. The most significant was that deception and cruelty were poor strategies when dealing with a species that valued justice and protecting civilians above all other considerations. The humans had demonstrated that they possessed both the military capability and the moral determination to destroy any force that threatened innocent lives. and potential aggressors throughout the galaxy took note of this warning. The nightmare that had begun with a fake distress call had ended with the birth of a new galactic order based on the principle that no species would be allowed to oppress others while humanity remained strong enough to prevent such atrocities.